bulking or cutting first? Let me explain. So first, let's start off with bulking. So in order to bulk, we need to eat in a calorie surplus. So a calorie surplus is eating more calories than your body requires per day. A calorie surplus is required to build significant amount of muscle mass. And with this, unfortunately, comes a little bit of fat gain. And a bigger calorie surplus is actually more beneficial for people that are just starting out, so beginners that don't have any weight training experience. And the main reason for this is because they're very far from genetic muscular potential. Now, another reason why calorie surplus is required for a significant amount of muscle mass gain is because building muscle is an energy costly process. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some exceptions to this as well. It's actually easier to build muscle and lose fat simultaneously if you have more fat stores than someone that's a lot leaner, and I'll get to that later on in the video. Okay, so to conclude the bulking side of things, I recommend a calorie surplus of about 500 calories for beginners. So you can calculate this very simply by doing 15 times your body weight in pounds plus 500. So now that we covered bulking, let's move on to cutting. First, we need to understand that protein synthesis is the driver behind adding more muscle mass. So that means when protein synthesis decreases, it makes it a lot more difficult to add more muscle mass. So you can increase protein synthesis in two primary ways. Number one is resistance training, and number two is eating protein. You couldn't guess that one right. So cutting basically just means losing more body fat, the complete opposite to gaining more body fat, and of course adding more muscle mass, which was bulking. Now when you cut, you need to be in what's called an energy deficit, or some people call it a calorie deficit. The bigger the calorie deficit, the more fat loss. However, the increase of likelihood of more muscle loss, and the smaller the calorie deficit, the less muscle loss and the slower the fat loss. So in order to calculate your calorie deficit, again, do the same formula for the bulking. So do 15 times your body weight in pounds. That will give you the amount of calories you need to eat per day to maintain your weight. Now once you have that number, you can use two numbers. You can either minus by, let's say, 500 or minus by 500 plus, whichever number you choose. Now the biggest reason why it's very difficult to gain muscle mass while cutting is because, like I said before, relating it back to protein synthesis, your resting muscle protein synthesis rates decrease, therefore making it harder to increase muscle mass. And this is also why it's very important, like I said before, to do weight training, because that will increase your resting muscle protein synthesis rates to, let's say, balanced levels. But one thing you have to understand, this is only temporary. So maybe like 24 to 48 hours. So here's a region you might not want to go for a larger calorie deficit, right? So when weight loss is too high, the body needs to tap into energy, and the body can't tap into fat stores fast enough. So what it does then is it goes into your fat-free mass. It taps into that, and most likely that's going to be some muscle tissue as well. Alright, so you probably think, okay, what kind of calorie deficit can I go for and not lose as much like muscle mass, or a large amount of it? So let me tell you exactly that. So for example, let's say you weigh 100 kg and you're 20% body fat. So this means you have 20 kg of body fat, because 20% of that 100 is 20. So once you have that number, you do 20 times 69. So once we have that number, which is 1,380, let's call it 1,400, we should not go below that amount of calories per day, otherwise we are going to suffer significant amount of muscle loss. Now one thing I have to mention, it's always going to be a smaller calorie deficit will always be a lot better for muscle retention. These are just rough guidelines. In fact, there's actually been some scientific studies that compared a weight loss of 0.7% per week compared to 1% per week, and the group of 0.7% actually gained some muscle mass while also losing some fat, and the 1% group didn't gain much muscle mass at all. I think, in fact, not any. So again, patience really is important here. Alright, so now that I've told you basically the science behind the cutting and the science behind bulking, let me give you the practical application in simple terms that you can come away with in this video. So number one, if you can see your abs a lot, it's shredded, it's popping out, I recommend bulking and really trying to increase your strength. And one thing you have to understand that as well is that when you first start a weight training program, a lot of it is going to be strength, and it's going to be motor learning, so neural adaptations, your brain learning the technique. The other option that I recommend for most people is if you're skinny fat, so you're fat and you're skinny, I recommend cutting. And the main reason for this is because, let's face it man, when you have a lot of fat, if you add more fat on top of that, you're not going to even notice any results, and that cutting, losing your body fat, is a much faster process than building more muscle mass, which in turn will lead to more instant gratification. And the third option is a body recomposition. Now, This option will take a lot longer, but this option is building more muscle mass and losing fat. And like I said at the start of the video, there are some exceptions, and that is for someone that's fat and skinny at the same time, so skinny fat. Now you can either choose cutting or bulking, of course, but most cases I'd say cutting. But however, if you want to choose building muscle, losing fat, here's why it works. The reason it works is because you need to understand that you have extra fat stores, so you have more fat. This fat can be used as energy, especially in the muscle building processes. So you use this fat as energy to build more muscle mass, and at the same time you have a small calorie deficit of, let's say, 300 calories per day, and with a good resistance weight training program, you're on a road to building muscle mass and losing fat. So those are the 3 options. So to summarize the whole video, because I like to summarize things, if you're a beginner, have a calorie surplus of about 500 calories per day. And the reason again is because you're very far from your genetic muscular potential, and you should aim for about 2 pounds of weight on a scale per week, equaling to about 24 pounds per year. Now not all of this is going to be muscle, some will be fat, but it's a very good starting point for most people. Now when it comes to cutting, like always, I recommend a slower process. This means aiming for a weight loss of about 0.7 per week, or at the maximum 1% per week. Now again, this is not black and white thinking, or at least that's what I don't want you to think. Like I said, you can do that calculation that I gave you before, which we had, like, I think it was 20 times 69, and that's how many calories we could eat per day. Now obviously yours is going to be a lot different, so don't go below any of that calories, otherwise you are going to lose significant amount of muscle mass. And again, less calories means less muscle protein synthesis, increasing the likelihood of us dampening the efforts to building more muscle mass. Right, so that's the end of the video. Bulking or cutting first, whichever one you choose. But one thing I don't want you to do is go on a forever bulk, right? Just don't go bulk mode and never ever see your abs again, right? I don't want that at all. I mean, unless you kind of like that dad bod or like that style, then that's fine. But anyway, that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel down below for more like science explained videos. And that's that. Stay positive, stay smiling, and as always, let's get it. I crushed it, man.